All right, so let's dive into something you've probably noticed. Why does it feel like boomers and younger generations are living in completely different economic universes? Today, we're going to break down a pretty wild article that offers a radical explanation, and it takes us on a journey through history, economics, and the very systems that shape how we think.
I mean, we've all felt it, right? This sense that the rules of the game were just different for our parents' generation. The author we're looking at today says, yeah, they were different, and the reason why is way more fundamental than you might think.
And this is how the author kicks the whole thing off. It's a great metaphor, really. The idea is that a generation can be born into a system, swimming around comfortably, without having any clue about the fierce, predatory history that actually created their nice, calm little pond.
So, to understand that history, we have to look at what the author calls the Madeira model. They argue that the textbook definition of capitalism we all learned is kind of useless here. To really get it, we need to go all the way back to a specific island in the 1400s.
See, according to this argument, capitalism isn't just about, owning things. It's a very specific recipe. And that recipe has three key ingredients that had never really been mixed together like this before. Land that could be owned and sold, labor that was just another product to be bought, and money that was also a commodity, totally separate from any local culture.
And Madeira was the first test kitchen for this recipe. Portuguese explorers showed up, used borrowed money, that's the capital, and started growing sugarcane with slave labor. It worked like a charm, made a ton of money, for a while, but it had a fatal flaw. By the 1600s, they had stripped the island of its resources, and the whole operation just packed up and moved on.
This created a blueprint, a repeatable four-step cycle that the author says is the real engine of capitalism. Step 1, find something valuable. Step 2, borrow money to rip it out of the ground. Step 3, scale up like crazy until it's all gone. And Step 4, leave the mess behind and go find the next thing. This model, the author says, was then put on steroids and brought to the Americas.
For centuries, this cycle just kept rolling, and it was brutal for the people doing the work. But then, something happened, something big. A completely new force showed up and threw a giant wrench in the gears of this machine.
And the impact of this interruption, according to the author, it was absolutely transformative. The rise of organized labor, we're talking unions, changed everything. It took American workers from living in what the author calls slave camps, using fake company money, to earning real wages, building lives, and creating a stable middle class.
Now here's the crucial part. How did they do it? Unions weren't just asking nicely for better pay. The author sees them as a powerful economic mechanism, like a pump that actively pulled a share of the massive profits being made at the top and forced it down into the pockets of the workers.
And you can see it right here. At their absolute peak, right when the boomer generation was coming of age, union power was immense. Now, it's basically collapsed. And this decline, this is the linchpin. This is the single most important piece of the author's entire argument.
Because of that collapse, the author argues that boomers and younger generations didn't just inherit different circumstances, they inherited two fundamentally different economic systems, even though we call them by the same name, capitalism.
Just look at the difference. The boomers walked into an economy with incredibly high labor power and what seemed like endless cheap resources. They inherited a system where that union pump was working overtime to share the wealth. Younger generations, they walked into the exact opposite. Low labor power, dwindling resources, and an economy that's going back to its original extractive roots.
This even changed how money itself worked. According to the author, the government could print tons of money without causing crazy inflation for one simple reason, that money never made it down to the working class. It just got stuck at the top. The unions were the pipeline that forced that capital to flow downwards.
And this quote is used to kind of sum up the boomer mindset from the author's point of view. It's presented as this worldview of, hey, I did my part, I took care of my own, without much thought for whether the system itself would be sustainable for the next generation. Because in their world, things always just got better.
So without that union check and balance, the source claims the system has just snapped back to its old programming. And that's led to the breakdown of communities, a relentless global search for cheaper and cheaper labor, and a hunt for new resources that's gotten so desperate we're seriously talking about mining asteroids.
So you might be wondering, what's the solution to all this? Well, this is where the argument takes its most, let's say, controversial turn. The author calls for a pretty radical rethinking of how society is structured.
The whole idea is based on rejecting something called universalism.
That's the belief that one single set of rules or one economic system should work for everyone everywhere on Earth. The author thinks that idea is not just wrong, but doomed to fail.
And to be perfectly clear about the author's tone here, they don't exactly mince words. This is a direct quote. They are aggressively dismissing the entire universalist approach, which they see as the real root of the problem.
So, the proposed alternative is something called Balkanization. Now, in this context, it means intentionally breaking up large countries into smaller, culturally unique regions. The idea is that these smaller communities could create their own rules and build strong local cultures that are actually able to stand up to and resist that extractive capitalist cycle we saw way back in Madeira.
And that really brings us back to the beginning. After this whole journey, from a tiny island hundreds of years ago to the global economy today, it all boils down to one final, really important question. If the economic system you're born into shapes your entire view of the world, what kind of worldview is our economy building in us right now?